Good evening and welcome to the Lopatcong Township Planning Board meeting of June 2021. At this time, I would like to invite you to join us in a silent moment of prayer, followed immediately by the oath of allegiance to the flag of our country. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, I'm required to state that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided indicating the time and place of the meeting in accordance with Chapter 231 of the Public Laws of 1975 by advertising a notice in the Star Ledger and the Express Times and by posting a copy on the bulletin board in the municipal building. Beth, may I have a roll call, please?
Yes, members Kleiner, Hoyle. Here. Pryor.
Here.
Sampson.
Here.
Weeks.
Here.
Mayor Manducci.
Here.
Chairman Van Vliet.
Here. We have a quorum?
Oh, yes.
Okay, we're starting off under, this is old business, Bridge Partners, Development Partners LLC, Block 99, Lot 6, subdivision and site planning hearing. Is the applicant here?
I am. Mr. Chairman, would you mind if I remain seated?
Not at all.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Arvid Eitel. I'm an attorney at law, licensed to practice in the state of New Jersey, and I represent the applicant before the board this evening for site plan and variance application. There are a couple of housekeeping matters, Mr. Chairman, if I may, through the chair, inquire of the attorney whether he finds that notices are proper and the board does in fact have jurisdiction over this application this evening.
The notices are proper. Council and I did have a conversation earlier today. There's an affirmation that the notice was appropriately published at least 10 days in advance. They're still waiting on the affidavit of publication, which will be forthcoming tomorrow. They can certainly submit that in LopatPB, meaning that they can proceed on the notice issued tonight as being adequate. On jurisdiction, I will say that the board's going to submit a reservation. Council may be aware that the board has submitted what I'll call white hat litigation to the court. There is a question as to jurisdiction of the board. It has to be resolved by the court. We're still operating underneath, or under I should say, a restraint that was previously issued by the court. So we're going to be proceeding tonight on that basis, but there still is a question that I think should be resolved by the court as to the board's jurisdiction. So I'll just counsel the board as to that and also the applicant.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have one additional housekeeping matter, if I may. Confirm with either the board secretary or with the professionals. I've received 2 review letters, and I'd like to confirm that those are in fact the review letters that were generated as a result of this application, and will be providing testimony and addressing any comments that were raised in those letters. So if I may confirm, I have the Colliers Engineering and Design review letter dated June 18, 2021. Mr. Sturbins authored that letter. I also have the, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing this, Ruggiero Plant Land Design letter. Mr. Ritter authored a 6-page report dated April the 14th, 2021, and that's the last planning letter that I have. And if I could just confirm that those are in fact the only reports or letters that were generated, review letters, as a result of our application that we'll be providing testimony to.
You're precluding the other review letters from Colliers and from Ritter Point?
I think that these are the most updated reports or letters that we have. The last letter that I have from Colliers is dated June 18th. I have not received an updated letter from Ruggiero.
Yes.
The last one was dated April the 14th. If the board has an updated letter, if I could get that.
I don't believe we do.
Thank you. So those are the only staff reports or letters that were generated as a result of this application. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to proceed with a brief introduction, and I do mean brief, and we'll go forward with the application with your permission.
Before we start on having the hearing, Are you aware of the JMT letter indicating that there is no sewer capacity for this property?
We received that as part of our completeness review, and we will address that. Our professionals will address that. So I don't know that there is an updated letter from the one that we received, and let me confirm the date of that letter as well.
The problem I have with that is that they warranted to us, when they came in for completion review of their application, that you did have sewer capacity. And apparently you don't have sewer capacity. At that point, we would have probably not granted you completion on the application. Based on this, I don't really know how you want to proceed. Without sewer capacity, it's beyond this board to grant you sewer capacity or anything like that. It requires you to go to town council, I believe, in order to try to gain more capacity, but that would require a negotiation with Phillipsburg and our Lopatcong Township. Plus, it would require us to have a complete review of our wastewater management program. I don't know if the council wants to get into that type of an expense to do that. And these are the reservations I have as the planning board chairman as we're coming in here. In order to do this, you have basically, I hate to put the ball back in your court, but how you want to proceed with this may point what you're trying to accomplish by having it held under this application. So I don't know if you would want a continuance on this, or if you want to get into the actual hearing. I would leave that up to you.
Sure. If I may address, Mr. Chairman, your concerns. First is that we have been deemed complete. So we're going to proceed under the assumption that we are in fact complete. But the board should be aware that we're seeking tonight preliminary approval, preliminary site plan approval. So we're not seeking final site plan approval this evening. And if there are some issues, and we'll have testimony this evening regarding the sewer capacity, if that's what the board wishes to hear. But I understand your concern. I believe that the preliminary application, and if the board deems it appropriate to approve the preliminary application, would still give the board the ability to not grant the final until other conditions are satisfied, your professionals are satisfied, that our calculations that there is in fact sewer capacity is sufficient for your professionals to deem the application ready to proceed with a final approval, which, as Mr. Chairman, you and the board members are aware, are what we have to have before any shovel can be put in the ground and before our rights become vested for vertical development.
Your choice.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to proceed, and I'd like to give you a brief introduction of the application before the board this evening, and we'll present our applicant's witnesses for this evening. As I stated earlier, I represent Bridge Development Partners, and they are the applicant for the board this evening. And the site, which is the subject of the application, is in Block 9 and designated as Lot 6 on the tax map of the Township of Lopatcong. It's more commonly known by its mailing address as 80 Strikers Road. Now, the site is currently a solar energy farm. As anyone that's driven by there can see, there are literally hundreds of solar panels that are up, and generates electricity for regeneration back into the power grid. What the applicant is proposing is to construct a warehouse facility of approximately 877,019 square feet, with approximately 26,400 square feet of that total amount dedicated towards office. We're not proposing any specific tenant at this time. And we're not sure if what that tenant is going to be to occupy the warehouse, but the applicant is a developer of warehouse spaces in this country and has considerable experience and expertise in both the design, construction, and then also the leasing and the management of these types of facilities. We're proud to bring this development project to the Township of Lopatcong. As your staff reports indicate and as we'll testify, we've noticed for preliminary site plan approval, we are seeking a variance. This is a permitted use in the zone that we're at. We're seeking a variance for parking where under your township ordinance section 243-50, we're required to have 1,195 parking spaces. We're proposing 390, and we will put on testimony to justify that parking variances. There are a number of design waivers that we're also seeking, specifically regarding the 2 driveway aprons that we're proposing being greater than 40 feet in width, where the township ordinance requires that it be under 40 feet, and also a fire drive aisle. We're proposing to be less than 30 feet. We're proposing it to be at 24 feet. Mr. Chairman, the application before this evening will be presented through the 4 witnesses that I'd like to call this evening. Let me give you a brief overview of the 4 witnesses that we'll have. We have Mr. Jeff Milonic, who's a management representative for the applicant. And he will provide you a little background about the applicant and their expertise, the type of work that they do, the developments that they've developed throughout the country, and what we're proposing on doing in this particular case in this site. Brett Skapanis is our professional engineer, and he'll be wearing 2 hats this evening. He is not only an engineer, he's also a planner. As the board members are aware, since this is a planning board application, we are seeking variance approval. We don't, under the municipal land use law, we're not required to have planning testimony in, but we'd like to give the board members the benefit of planning testimony and justifications as well. Mr. Skapanis will address the planning testimony as well. We will have Mr. Corey Chase, who is our traffic engineer, to provide an overview and details of the anticipated traffic impact that we're going to have, as well as the on-site parking and circulation. And finally, we'll have Antonia Lorene. I believe I got your last name right. I apologize if I didn't. And she's flown in from Chicago. She's our architect. She'll be providing architectural details for this particular development. Mr. Chairman, hopefully those are the 4 witnesses that we'll be calling, and with your permission, I'd like to call our first witness, Mr. Milani.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Just take it.
Good evening. If you could raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay. Please state your name, spell your last for the record.
Sure. Name is Jeff Milanick, Milanik.
Thank you, Mr. Moyle.
Certainly.
Thank you. Mr. Milanick, Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Milanick, would you give the benefit of your employment and give us a little bit of a background of how you are related to the applicant this evening?
Sure, certainly. First of all, good evening, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. We've appeared here before, as you know, in the past. I am the Northeast Regional Partner for Bridge Development Partners. We are a national company, actually international now, with offices in Chicago, Miami, New Jersey, LA, Seattle, and most recently in London. And we develop and own industrial buildings, or more commonly known as warehouses or distribution centers. We find sites in well-located areas that are adjacent to good truck access for the highways, for the containers that come from the ports, and then ultimately put the product into the warehouses for final distribution. I've been a partner in Bridge since 2014. Within the state of New Jersey, we purchased our first property in January 15, and as of last December, we've in Northern Jersey developed over 12.5 million square feet of distribution buildings worth in excess of $3 billion.
And Mr. Milanick, prior to your association with the applicant this evening, you were also in the development game, we'll call it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I started in the industrial development business when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I'd like to think. But I actually started in 1987 as a much younger man, as a leasing agent for a company in Central Jersey known today as Heller Industrial Parks. Grew that company from 5 million square feet of space to 16.5. And I decided to leave in 2013 to strike out on my own.
And Mr. Lonick, you're familiar with the applications before the board this evening, is that correct?
I am.
And that includes not only the visits, numerous visits you've made to the site, and the physical application that you've submitted, but also the site plan, the drawings, the architecturals, and so forth. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in large part, those drawings and the technical details were as a result of your input as to what would be appropriate, not only for the site, but also for marketability to prospective tenants. Is correct?
That is correct.
And would you say that you have some level of expertise in the area of distribution centers, warehouses?
Yes, over my career, I've developed over 30 million square feet of warehouses.
And you heard my introduction where it indicated that we don't have a tenant for this facility, is that correct?
That is correct.
So give us a little bit of detail, first of all, if you wouldn't mind. Tell us what it is that we're proposing on doing on this site, and tell us what kind of tenants and what kind of uses you think that this site will attract.
Certainly. So the first, I would like to just point out the exhibit that will be referred to later on, the colored site plan on
Let me
the,
stop you for just 1 second. If we can have this marked as A1, Mr. Chairman, I'll have that marked with today's date, A1.
yes,
Okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Lyon.
no problem.
Referring to A1, why don't you tell us a little bit about the site? And the
Certainly. So this is actually second or third generation of this particular site plan. We had a previous application, as the board may recall, in before, which actually had two buildings on it. I believe about 700,000 feet, and up where there is a lack of a better word, green appendage to the top of that drawing, we had a smaller 200-some-thousand square foot plan. Based on feedback we had received and also input from the adjacent neighborhoods, we decided to eliminate the second building. And we actually grew the footprint of the first building a little more than the original, but eliminated the back one so we could provide green space adjacent to that neighborhood. We felt it was appropriate to make the building closer to the street, just a little bit larger, because that is where the main traffic will be going through. It's the Strikers Road, and then down, ultimately down 22 to Route 78.
Now, in terms of the layout and design of the facilities, if you could relate it back to what you believe, based on your capacity, being familiar with what warehouse and distribution centers are marketable, tell us what it is that you think these features that we're presenting make it marketable.
Well, and I think the best way to describe that is to point out a project that we're just completing within the town of Lopatcong. As we know, we built a 975,000 square foot facility on the old Ingersoll Rand plant, just off of Route 22. And I'm proud to say, and I believe the board or members are aware, that building was leased out completely. It was leased out to a Japanese clothing company called Uniqlo, Uniqlo. Very much the type of tenant that we look to put inside our buildings. And just on that point, one of the things you'll hear later is a testimony about parking ratios. And we asked for technically, I think it was a waiver at the time, but I don't want to say what I got at the time for that, but we had the same discussion, and we felt very confident that we would not overpark the site or have any situation like that on our hands. Whether the members are aware or not, Uniqlo has now been at 100% occupied and full operational status. And I believe they're using about a third to maybe 50% of the parking we even provided at that point in time. A lot of these buildings today are mechanized. In the case of Uniqlo, they put about $50 million worth of pick and pack and sort facilities within there. So they do reduce the number of people actually at the sites. But the main attributes of this building are 40-foot clear height for stacking purposes, ESFR sprinkler systems, which are located at the roof but are designed to eliminate a fire rapidly in the event one were to occur. A cross-dock operation makes a very efficient throughput on the building. One side receives, the other side is output. And we also designed the site, as you can see, with circulation. We don't want any trucks stacking up on the roads or anything like that, so we put quite a bit of circulation roads within the facility so we don't cause any related traffic on the adjacent roadways.
So in terms of the parking spaces that we're providing, which is 390, based on your expertise in this area with distribution centers and warehouses, do you believe that 390 would be sufficient for a prospective tenant for their employees and their guests to park?
Yes, I absolutely do. And to take that one step further, the project I was mentioning, 3 of the other buildings went up in Phillipsburg, as you may be aware, 600, a 400, and just under a 300, all with the same parking ratios. All are fully occupied, and no one has excess parking problems.
And just to take it one step further, if a prospective tenant were to have a need for more than 390 parking spaces on site, would there be sort of a natural selection process where they would look at the site and say, this just isn't going to work for us, and they would move on to another site?
That is the nature of what the business has become. We design a very generic building. As I had outlined for you, we do not know the exact customer or tenant that's going to be coming into these buildings. Chances are it may have something to do with an e-commerce shipment, and the reason I say that is because everything has something to do with e-commerce shipments today. I don't know a business out there that does not have an e-commerce component to it. But some of the mega facilities that people have heard about, over the years or in the papers, they would take one look at this facility and take a quick pass on it because they realized the constriction of the parking.
And Mr. Malenik, I've sort of tailored your responses to the board, or what the information you're providing to the board based on my questions that I've asked. Is there anything else you'd like to tell the board, not only of why you chose Lopatcong in this site, but your continued experience with Lopatcong, or anything else?
No, we felt very comfortable when we found this particular site because of the wonderful experience we had on the other project, to be honest with you, between the professionalism of the board, the reception of the council, just the overall ease of traffic in and out of the particular sites. We looked at this as having a very similar attribute. The other thing I'd like to mention is, as the board may recall, one of the most important things to us and me personally at Bridge was who is the financial partner. And I think that's a question that the board would be very interested in as well, because in my business, not everybody comes before you with a strong financial partner such as I have. We have a partner in our company, actually in the holding company of Bridge Development Partners. It's Texas Teachers Retirement System. They are in the top 5 of institutional pension fund advisors in the United States. I don't know the exact number, but it's in hundreds of billions of dollars, so I stopped counting after the first 100. But they support us, they look at our projects, and one of the things that's extremely important to them is a policy of being a good neighbor, of building buildings in locations where they should be, that have good truck access and everything else. And as I mentioned earlier, once we learned of some of the input from the adjacent property owners, we decided to enact that and reduce the size and scope of the project for that reason. With the market where it is today, and certainly since we're in the post-pandemic, the need for warehousing, the need for distribution, I think is more needed today than ever. Once we came out of the pandemic, I think everybody, I would venture to say on the board, probably clicked and shipped at least 1 or 2 boxes somewhere during that process. It brought it home. It will never replace retail, I will tell you that, but it certainly has made all of our lives a lot easier. We are also very mindful of the type of businesses we work with. We want strong credit tenants because it's our investment that's in there, so I want to know that my money is going in and is as protected as it can be. We also are very mindful of the uses we put in our buildings. We do not put high hazardous materials or a high hazard storage building. The liability of environmental contamination, risk from those is just too much for us to take. Now, I won't say that there won't be any, and by that I mean a bottle of whiteout, according to DEP, is considered a hazardous substance. So there will be, as the term is referred to, as de minimis quantities of such material. But as an overall use, we are looking for retail type clothing, books, anything along those lines that are very clean and that the community would be proud to own.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if the board members have any questions for Mr. Maloney.
I do, Mr. Chairman, if
Yes.
there's nobody else. Mr. Malonick, I'm happy that you had such a great experience the first time around. But, of course, we reset things and we look at each
I understand.
application separately. Your first exhibit there, I can't see real well from here, but I don't see any mention of the easement on the southwest corner of the lot and the connection with NFI.
Mr. Chairman, if I can address that, we will have a witness or civil engineer who might be in a better position.
Well, I'm asking Mr. Malonick about something that only an owner would know. The first set of plans that were submitted, I think it was 326, did not show that. And then we received an update 427. It was dated 427. We received it on April 28th. All of a sudden this appeared, and looking backwards, we found a consent of the owner. The owner happened to be the owner of the
Solar field.
photo field, and that was dated 12/22/20, months before your first application. And frankly, I'm a little confused. I mean, did this guy give that option while you had your option on the property? Why wasn't it shown? Why did we have to ask for it? Why isn't it shown on your first exhibit? Very confused over the whole situation.
Fully understood, as were we. We were not aware of the easement when we first went to contract and started developing our plans, which caused the first set to come out without the easement. Subsequently, we did become aware of it. We brought it to the attention of your engineers, and he said, I would put that on the plan. I'm requiring you to put that on the plan right now. It is a form of an agreement, but not a fully enacted easement.
Okay, so that easement is not yet recorded,
Correct.
but through either a lack of due diligence or lack of disclosure, it seems you weren't aware of it when you took your option, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just clarify one issue. Certainly your board attorney can advise the board the legal consequences or the legal implications of an agreement to have an easement versus an easement itself. The easement runs with the land. The agreement is sort of the precursor to, well, we're going to talk about an easement at some point in the future that will in fact run with the land. So we haven't reached the point where there is an easement. I believe it's just an agreement at this point that there would be an easement.
Well, how can you submit a final site plan not knowing the configuration of that intersection or not?
Arvin, if I may, so when we did our title search and all the things that you do during due diligence,
Yeah.
none of that appeared. And that was the cause of confusion.
But my question stands. We don't know if you're going to have that intersection there, two driveways side by side, if you're proposing that or you're not.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I think that the NFI applications and the applicants, it would be incumbent upon NFI to come before this board to propose an easement that we would agree to. There is no.
Well, what are you telling me, that you haven't given an easement? I'm very confused right now.
There's no easement that's been recorded. Right now, there is just an agreement that there could be an easement in the future.
So what's your site plan tonight? One driveway?
Yeah, we have one driveway. is that
Right, yeah, our civil engineer will testify to that.
All right, and if that's the direction it goes, that's what's going to be, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
These are
All right.
independent applications.
Correct.
All right, that's helpful.
Mr. Chairman, if there are any other questions from board members, and I'm not sure whether you'd like to open it up to the public after each witness or.
That's always been our practice, so if you're complete, I would invite the public to have any questions of this witness. Yes, sir, would you come forward and please state your name and your address.
Good evening. My name is Donald Kregel. I live at 6 Peddlers Lane. My question is, what is the proposal? I haven't been here for these. We just had a whole bunch of things, but irregardless, I want to know what's going to happen with the infrastructure on Streckers Road. Because as of right now, I currently drive that road every day, and there's already quite a bit of traffic there. Plus, the road's a mess. That's beside the point. But I wanted to know, are they going to widen the road? Is it going to be a 4-lane road?
These are things we don't know yet. We haven't had testimony on yet, so I really can't answer you at this point. So if you would hold on, and you might want to ask that of their civil engineer when he testifies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. In that case, I'll close the public portion.
If I could,
Sure.
maybe one more. And I think you might be the correct one to answer this. That road in the back of the site, tying in the overlook, can you tell me what that's for?
That evolved from some early conversations we had about accessibility to the adjacent neighborhood because we are near and forgive me, the park down the slope. I don't remember the name of it, but one of the requests was, could it have access down and wander down for people of the neighborhood? That's why it was inserted, not a requirement of ours, but we can.
Well, my question is, it's really not tying into anything recreational. It was kind of presented as an emergency access to overlook. And
I mean, I would defer to my engineer on that.
all right, we'll defer that, okay?
Thank you.
All right.
I have one.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm sending you too far here, but your detention pond down here, is that planning on running into ours? There are two that are already down below that?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, he'll speak to it, but one thing I will emphasize is that in the midst of all of this planning, the new regulations came out from DEP as of March 1st, and we had to pivot really rapidly to make sure that we could try to accommodate the new regs, which is a feat in itself because the regs are a little vague. Nobody understands it. We're all trying to figure it out together, but we did our best to incorporate it.
I just worry about the flow, that's all. I mean, you're taking all that surface, putting it through, and if it was going into ours, you had to size ours too. Thank you.
Anybody else on the board? Any questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank
for
you.
your testimony.
Mr. Chairman, if I may call our civil engineer.
Yes.
And we'll also be wearing the hat of a planner.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Scavens. If you could raise your right hand. You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give the board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Could you please state your name, spell your last for the record?
Sure. First name is Brett, B-R-E-T-T. Last name is Skapinetz, S-K-A-P-I-N-E-T-Z.
May I, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Skapinetz, would you give the benefit of your credentials to the board as both a civil engineer and your certifications appointment?
Sure. I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Rutgers University. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of New Jersey as well as a licensed planner in the state for over 20 years. I've testified before over 150 boards in this capacity on multiple applications through industrial as well as residential, commercial. Been before this board. I was before you on the other application across the highway, across Route 22. My licenses are still current.
And if I may ask one follow-up question, of the hundreds of applications that you've been before other boards on, have your qualifications as an expert in the field of civil engineering and planning ever not been accepted by a board?
No.
And since the last time you appeared before this board, have your credentials changed in any way?
No, they have not.
Mr. Chairman, I would proffer him as an expert in the field of civil engineering and planning.
He's so acceptable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Skapinetz, you're familiar with the applications before the board this evening?
Yes, yep, very much so.
And you're intimately familiar with the site itself?
Yes, I am.
Dozens of visits to the site.
Yep.
And the plans that were submitted, the civil engineering plans that the board has reviewed and the board's professionals have reviewed, they're prepared by you or under your direction, is that correct?
That's correct.
And give us the benefit, if you would, of a general overview of the current conditions of the site and the proposal that we have for the development of that site.
Sure, well, we'll do. And just for the board and the public, what I'll do is I'll I'd like to just give a quick snapshot of the existing conditions. I'll pull up the survey in a moment, and then run through just the various aspects of the plans, simply almost the way they are in order in the site plans. I'll go through the site plan sheet. I'll go through grading and drainage. I'll go through lighting, landscaping, talk a little bit, obviously about stormwater, and hit on outside agencies, and then just the final points with respect to detail of the plan. But I guess before I do that, since the question was raised by Member Weeks about stormwater, I'll touch on this in a little bit more detail, but the point to your question, we are not, there is water that currently runs from this site generally towards that basin. We're not increasing the amount of water that's going to that basin under proposed conditions. The majority of the water is going essentially towards that wet pond shown in blue on the exhibit.
And you're referring to A1, is that correct?
On A1, that's correct. So I don't know if we need to mark this as the exact same plan that was part of the set. It's the Alta Land Title Survey by Dynamic Survey, which is used as reference to in our plan set. Do you still want it marked, or?
I'm sure they're showing different information than on the
It's
first.
not showing anything different than what's in the survey in your plan set.
So if we could just refer to it by the sheet number, it is a sheet that was provided to the board members as part of the application. It would be sheet number 1, is that correct?
You know what, I think I'll
Go
mark
ahead
it.
and make it A2.
I'll make it A2. So exhibit A2 is the Alta Land Title Survey by Dynamic Survey with a preparation date of 10/12/20 with a last revision of 12/21/20. So it's been described, obviously, what's on the property. Strikers Road, the lot itself is block 99, lot 6. It's 78.55 acres. Strikers Road runs along the bottom of the sheet in this orientation. And as I go through the plans, the site plan is in the same orientation. North is to the left, south is to the right, east to the top, and west towards the bottom of the sheet. So the site itself has the solar farm on it. What's unique about it is its shape, as you can see in the outline of the boundary, but also the topographic nature of the property. It drops about 100 feet from north to south, and also then drops roughly 48 feet from east to west at the highest and lowest points. So we are dealing with the topographic change to the far right or south end of the sheet. We do have Lopatcong Creek. We did have a wetlands walk done of it. You'll see it's represented in the plans and in the survey that there were flags placed along what would be the anticipated wetland boundary, and we are basically have performed our design to adhere to the buffers that would be anticipated by DEP to those wetlands, as well as to the stream. That stream is a C1 waterway, so in effect, the wetlands will have a 150-foot buffer, and the stream will have a 300-foot buffer, and those notations are in our plan, and we are providing a design basically to...
Quickly, has that delineation been approved by DEP?
No.
Not yet, it's pending, right?
No.
Okay.
That's good. So I'll now move to A1, and I don't know if it was given a description, but A1 is a site plan rendering prepared by our office. It has a preparation date of today, 6/23/21. So it's a colorized version of our site and landscaping plan sets, or plan sheets. It's been colorized for easier visualization this evening. So again, in the same orientation with Strikers Road to the bottom. That's awesome. I have to get me one of these. I'm running into this too often, but I need it. So again, same orientation, Strikers Road to the bottom. And we have the building proposed in, I'll call it the bronze color, of 877,019 square feet. There is an array of loading docks along the western edge of the building, another row of docks on the eastern face of the building. To the south and to the north, we have banks of the employee parking. And then there is two groupings of trailer stalls, trailer parking stalls to the east beyond the easternmost loading docks or eastern face of the building. Then, as mentioned by Mr. Melanek, we've got we'll call it the notch at the eastern end where we had previously proposed another secondary building that was presented last year. That has been since removed. The idea here is to obviously maintain it as green. We've got, I'll go into more detail later, and you'll see around the outside perimeter of that notch, which is closest to the residential, which is overlook at Lopatcong, beyond the boundary to that edge of the boundary to the east. A significant amount of landscaping. We've got essentially almost a triple stacked row of trees running along the entirety of that eastern as well as the northern and southern flanks of that notch of the property. I'll touch on circulation briefly. We talked just a moment ago, there are the driveway on the northern end. This is a full movement driveway to service the site. Then we have a secondary driveway that is also full movement just before the edge of the southern face of the building. Now, normally when we see these types of projects, we look to see the access, kicking out to the edge, off the edge of the face of the building. But as Strikers Road curves, the right-of-way pulls away from that location to where we would ideally put that driveway, plus the change in topo prevents us from being able to stick the driveway in that location as well because Strikers Road continues to drop. We provided this access, again, as a full movement drive that winds around the outside of the, to the southern edge of our proposed development, absent the drainage structures. And we created this loop road that allows vehicles to then veer off either into the loading spaces if they're trucks or to circulate around to the employee parking spaces on the southern face of the building. Why the loop? Again, we're talking about grade and the significant change in grade. We need to have a transition of the grade of that drive. Can't have it too steep. So in order to make up the additional distance, we needed to keep that slope at essentially our maximum. We are providing that loop to provide that additional distance. The benefit of it, though, is it provides us with another notch for an additional stormwater quality feature. So that's what's in the middle of that circle, is another basin. Circulation, once you get into the facility, is essentially two-way access aisles, two-way drive in front of the truck loading spaces to the east, two-way aisles that separate the trailer parking spaces, an outer ring two-way aisle that runs around the outer from perimeter of the building, mainly on the eastern flank and then on the northern end as well, leading out to that northerly driveway. And then on the westerly side of the building, same thing. We've got the loading docks and then a wider two-way aisle, which allows for movement of trucks as well as the ability of the width for trucks to be able to maneuver and back into the loading docks. We propose 142 total loading dock stalls between the two faces, the eastern and western faces of the building. There's 143 trailer parking spaces, essentially in the field to the east. And then, as mentioned before, the 390 employee parking spaces. Just a figure to throw out in relation to Building 7. We were looking at a ratio there, and just in total square footage, mind you, not breaking out difference between the warehouse and the office. So we just took the total size of the building in Building 7 over at BP 78 across the way. That's about 975,000 square feet. We were looking at about one parking space in total per 2,200 square feet in area, roughly 2,220. We're at about one at 2,274 here. So the ratio is very close. Even though that building is much bigger, our parking ratio is very much the same. The parking spaces that are being proposed for the employees on the northern and northern and southern faces are 9 by 18 parking spaces and have 24-foot wide drive aisles between them. We do recognize that there is the comment, the waiver with respect to the width of that aisle. We have 24 feet. In the other building, we had a similar situation. The aisles there were 25 feet. So at a minimum, I'm looking at making the aisle 25 feet to be consistent with building 7 as part of BP 78. But we felt similar to with that application and this one, that the 25 feet was more than adequate. Certainly with respect to the ability for a fire vehicle, we have proper radii for the vehicle to move in and out of that area and circulate through. So we're hopeful. We did not receive a comment from the fire official or fire chief. I'm not sure who's issuing it in town, but we're hopeful that we have a similar outcome, that we're keeping consistent with respect to the aisle. Only that aisle that's up against for the employee parking spaces. Once we get to the eastern and western faces, we have the stalls, and then we have a much wider 60-foot aisle that runs along there. So much wider along those two faces. We are proposing sidewalks on the northern and southern faces along the edges of the building to help facilitate pedestrian movements for the employees to walk in from their cars, walk to the sidewalk, and get to the entrances. Right now, we're showing offices at all 4 corners of the building, so it's anticipated that we would have employee doorways at each of those 4
What was
corners.
the square feet of the offices again, compared to the warehouse?
We have 26,400 square feet of office and 850,619 square
Thank
feet of warehouse space.
How many parking spaces are we required per our ordinance?
Per your ordinance, you would require 1,195 parking spaces,
And you're proposing?
390 employee parking spaces. Okay. So moving on from, I talked a bit about the topography and how we have the drop from edge to edge. Essentially, the larger drop is from the north into the south. When we enter into the driveway on the northern end and we drive into the building, the driveway grade there is about 343. The first floor elevation of the building is 339. So we have there's about a 4-foot drop in elevation between the first floor of the building and the elevation at that driveway location. With that significant drop from edge to edge, what we're doing is the building is at that elevation of 339 all the way across. Okay, so by the time we get to the edge here, we're making up obviously the building without adding fill into this edge of the area would be sticking out of the ground by considerable amount. So as you also see in the plan, we have retaining walls in a few different locations on the plan, predominantly along the western and southern ends of the site, because that's where we have our largest differential in drop. So as we start on Strikers Road, where I'm pointing just south of the northernmost driveway, the wall starts at about 0 and then extends out to about its highest point in the southwest corner, where we have a wall of about 26 feet in height. Now that'll be where we have a single wall. Once we get to a point around the corner, we now introduce essentially a secondary wall where as the outer road, so if you're pulling from Strikers, if you're coming from the south and you're making a right-hand turn into the southernmost driveway, there's an outer loop road that runs along to I'll call it the smaller loop in the southeast corner, as I described earlier, at a point just beyond the entrance to the employee spaces, right where I'm pointing here. There's a secondary wall that's created because we essentially have a step in. We're creating a step in grade, so we're doing a tiered wall system instead of one much bigger, larger wall. And we're also trying to make up the grade as this driveway comes around. It's lower than the parking spaces are at that southwest end. So I need to introduce a secondary wall to help make up that grade. I know I'm not maybe describing it that well. One wall around the outer edge, and I have a secondary wall that's running right along in the island between the two driveways. This driveway, once we come around the loop here, feeds right into the trailer stalls and the trailer loading area. And that is all roughly at the same grade. So I have 2 walls that are tiered going up, with the highest face of any one of the walls being about 25 feet.
Just so I
I'm
understand,
sorry.
it's going, for my notes, it's going up from the building up towards where the stepping grade is going from that direction to your right.
Right. This is almost level with the building.
Okay.
The driveway is. Then I drop down to this drive aisle. Then I drop down to the basin.
All right, I got that reversed.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a comment from the Highlands.
Yes.
Thinking that the project consists of one building,
Yes.
but the existing solar array currently occupying the site, it will be partially relocated to the rooftop of the building,
Yes.
and the rest of them are supposed to remain in place?
Yeah.
Where are they remaining in place if they're having a drop like that?
Right. The thought is that in the area, in the open grass area in the back where there are panels now
So
today.
they'll be relocated.
Right. With the exception of, we have a refinement of the landscaping plan, comments about enhancing the landscaping and screening to the neighbors to the east by providing some berming and additional plantings on those berms in that open green area. So absent the change to that, we would look to keep the solar panels within areas in between.
Uh,
I have a question for the board, while the engineer is up here. You know, I promote sidewalks. I often get voted down. People, you have a library now that people walk to. You have the recreational area along the stream. You have rafts, not rafts, the ice place next to it. People do walk. It's a chance to get a sidewalk. If you don't look for one now, you'll never see one. I wish we had done it on Perucci's too. I'd make that proposal to the board, so, and you can do what you want with it.
The applicant, sidewalks are required, so if you want a waiver on it.
Well, I don't, well, are they, I don't know, I didn't see that there was a waiver that was a requirement to provide the sidewalk along the frontage.
It's my understanding we can require it. You do not ask for a waiver. I make this proposal to the board a lot.
Okay.
I'd leave it to the judgment of the entire board.
I refer to the board.
Excuse me?
George?
I have a question. Since the green space is going to be, in the notch is going to be retained as a solar field. Now, if I understand what was testified earlier, the path that's coming down from Overlook is supposed to be a path for the public or an emergency driveway to come, so that you're intending to bring it through your solar field? My understanding is that at least the last solar field that was up there was totally fenced and the public was told to keep out because of the risk of electrifying themselves on the panels.
Right.
So isn't there a conflict there between public access and solar in that field?
Well, obviously, we would need to deal with the security of the field on the ground. So I would agree there with respect to how that would be potentially fenced off in that area. But as far as access to the public with respect to that driveway, that drive is just a gravel drive and only meant to be potentially for an emergency access or to the neighbors to the east. It's nothing more. There's
Who requested that?
That came up it was in conversations months ago. It came up as providing potential access between that and the access to the park, to potentially parkland, because this is the county land in the southeast.
Well, there's recreational opportunities there.
Right.
And I believe there was a concern about people wandering onto your property and liability and so on.
Right.
And this business of an access road, I'm not allowed to testify, but it's an idea that just won't go away. When was it, Jim? 20 years ago?
Yeah.
They had a lockdown on Overlook. There was a hostage situation and people complained. They said they couldn't get out. Well, did they think if they had a second egress, the cops weren't going to shut that down? Then that question came up about vehicles. Have you been to Overlook? Have you looked at?
Yeah, I drove in through there.
The exit there is 2 lanes,
Split.
right?
Right.
There's a wide island, and then there's a third lane. With a little traffic control, you would need a helicopter crash to shut that down.
Right.
So to me, this emergency access doesn't work. And then as you get into it, it's gated. Who controls the gate?
Right.
Is somebody really going to go through a gravel road and wander about and wait for somebody to open a gate? Makes no sense to me. So
I'm okay
the
with-
request, unless the request comes from the board, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Mr. Chairman, we would defer to the board if the board wishes to have that gravel road continue. We would certainly make accommodations for it. If the board's pleasure is that it would prefer not to have that, we're okay with that as well. If it wants limited access by way of a gate with a Knox box.
Well, it's really kind of half-baked right now. I mean, it dumps off onto a beautiful lawn. I don't know, do you want an emergency vehicle coming through there in the middle of shift change? Again, I just see nothing but problems.
Is that something we have to ask the fire chief? Did you put it there for a reason?
No, I need a fire chief. That's nothing to say about that.
I don't even think a fire truck could actually access that grade.
Right.
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 So
In the fire, I don't see a reason.
I don't, I see it's more of a safety hazard there wandering their way through a solar farm than it is anything else.
So
It's not, I'm one vote on the board, but I don't think I'd rather see it taken.
I would agree. I don't see much need for it. I just don't.
But if I can just maybe tie together, if it's not, if you're going to leave solar panels up there and they're fenced off, and you're not going to have a fire truck go through there, you don't need the road, and B, you're providing a visual buffer, but there really are no opportunities for Overlook, recreational opportunities for Overlook or connections to the stream, and that's the question this leads to.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall any conversations about these solar panels being relocated to that area.
Well, they exist there now, but
No, they exist there now, but not in that particular area they exist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And how much of a distance is it between the last stalls to the east to the Overlook property?
600 feet.
There's a grade change as well, correct?
There's a varying grade change. It's anywhere between just a couple feet and almost, I think it's almost.
Could you just take your magic pointer there and
Yep.
show us where the solar panels are going to be?
Well, on the roof of the building,
Yeah.
and then it would be in the green patch.
All right, so that
Notch.
green patch is going to be filled with solar panels.
Excuse me?
The green patch is going to be filled with.
Well, not completely, because we also
Not
have,
the-
we have the landscaping around the perimeter, and then we have the areas where we would be prodding, and there's a comment
Yeah.
about adding in berms and additional screening to the residential.
That's what I was going to ask, Mr. Scaffin. There was a comment we had in our letter that was requested that, whether or not that emergency access drive remains as it was laid out, our concern was that the Overlook property is much higher in elevation than the warehouse building itself. And though adding a triple row of trees around that notch will provide some screening and some benefit over time as the trees grow in, to provide kind of a day one enhanced screening to the residential properties to the east, our suggestion was that the board consider requesting that the applicant construct berms in that area and provide, possibly for the board's benefit, some cross sections or some profiles of that area to show how, a berm 5 or 10 or 15 feet in height planted with trees would serve to provide some screening and additional enhanced buffering to the properties to the east on day one, as the building gets constructed, because these will be buildings that are 45 and 50 feet in height, or a building that will be 45 and 50 feet in height. So that screening will kind of take some time to really provide a permanent screen to the structure. So.
Yeah, I'm going to make a request. I'm going to build on what Adam said. Whether berms are the answer, I don't know. You'd have to go up there. These things are, I guess, 3 stories high. These residences, there's a tree stand, a strip of trees that do a fairly effective job in the fall, less so, in winter, less so. Whether it's berms, whether it's additional evergreens or deciduous trees or something, I think everyone would benefit from additional, doing a heroic job with screening up there.
And look, we thought that from the start, to be honest. I mean, the amount of landscaping and trees that are along, as I mentioned earlier, along that eastern edge, there's a significant amount of trees being planted there to start. So obviously, if we can work with your engineer to change them around and make them a little bit more effective in their placement, we'll do so.
I suggest just propose something.
Yeah.
You hear what the objective
I hear
is.
you.
I don't know what's going in there exactly, what you're saying here, but I could tell you from my experience of a building going up next to my house, the lower shrubbery is just as important as the higher ones.
Okay.
All right, because as those trees grew, it filled in, but that gave me a buffer that I could sit on my porch. All right, these people aren't always going to be up high.
Right.
All right, so the lower shrubbery with the flowers and everything else was great. All right, it still is. So that's something I would, I don't know what's in there exactly, George, but that to me is a blessing to my place.
Yeah, along with Adam, we asked him whether the applicant was willing to give us a couple of cross sections so we can really see what's going on there, whether a berm's effective, not effective. Having the solar field in there is a little something new that I wasn't aware that they were going to keep it in that upper notch, but that said, I think the section would just help everybody have a better understanding of how effective that is. I agree that the trees that run along Overlook right now are pretty thick and do provide some buffer, but obviously in the fall and winter, we're not going to be fully leafed out up there either. So I think it's well worth looking at to see what's going to go on up there and have a section or two through there to give us a feeling of what's going on.
We would agree to do that and provide that. Okay.
I have one other question while I'm on the subject. You had mentioned that you had mapped the floodplain of the stream, the wetlands, the transition areas, and the buffers.
Right.
Also in that area, though, there is an area, and I just wonder if you included it on the maps because I don't recall it. We do have regulated areas along that stream that are known as municipally important groundwater recharge areas. And they do extend into the corner coming off of the county property and then taper as they come across your property. I guess the question I have is, I believe that should be shown on your plans, that area, and then provide us with a calculation. You may comply, but provide us with a calculation that shows that you're within the disturbance figures. In that area, you're limited to 15% disturbance of the groundwater important recharge areas. And I think we need to see those calculations just to be sure that you can comply. I think you do impact it, but whether you impact it enough to require relief, I don't know.
Okay. We will look into that.
I have a question.
Sure.
I don't know if this is the latest drawing here, 326, but we show where we're going here, where you want to put it, but we're not showing the existing warehouse that's already there. And it seems like if you have 132 parking spots for trucks, how are we going to control this traffic right here? Because they're all going the same direction.
Mm-hmm. So to answer your first question, that aerial is from pre-construction of that warehouse building across the street from us, so on Stryker. So the date probably could be from 2019 is, I think, the latest.
Date's redacted, but the date on here is.
Yeah. Right, but there's a note in the bottom. Typically, we pull from 2019, the latest DEP aerial mapping, so it's a little bit behind. And to your other question, that is traffic testimony, which will be addressed by our traffic engineer, Corey Chase, who's here.
Okay.
So to move on beyond the grading, I'm going to go to stormwater management, unless there's any other question.
I do, and it's
Okay.
regarding the solar. Are you done with your solar testimony?
I'm done with that, yes.
Okay. Just a quick question, because we were just conferring. Where is the required, I think your testimony was that the Highlands wanted those relocated?
The Highlands asked us whether they're going to be relocated there, and we mentioned to them that they were asking us to balance. They knew that they were going on top of the building. There was going to be a portion of them. They were wondering about the balance. And we touched base with them and indicated that we had the opportunity to place them in the eastern notch. And
It
that
wasn't
was
part of
that
the
was-
consistency determination, because I didn't see any discussion of solar.
No, it was just simply an off phone call that I received, and they had just asked and inquired what we were doing with it. So that's the only reason why it's in the letter.
All right, just as to the existing, what's the setback of the existing and the notch to the overlook, do you know?
I don't, but I could take it off the aerial. Actually, it's.
What?
About 200 feet.
Yeah, only because there are requirements for the site plan in chapter 243.
Okay.
Just to be aware that you have to comply with those. And just as for the rooftop, what's the effect on the height of the building accounting for the solar arrays to be
Right.
relocated on the
Right.
rooftop?
I honestly, I don't know because of the mount, how it's going to be mounted, how they will be mounted on there. It's going to be obviously a different setup as far as mounting as what's out there on the ground today. But I'll take a look and when I'm done testifying and see if I can come up with a number.
Yeah, only because there is a limitation again in the ordinance that
Understood.
you can't exceed the height,
Right.
including those of the zone district, so.
Okay. Well, we're not going to exceed the height. We'll whatever's required. Let's put it that way.
I thought, I would think so.
Yeah.
I just want to be
We'll do
sure.
what we can
that
to
that's
ensure we
on
don't.
the record, just because there are conditions
Right.
within the ordinance that have to be complied with, and I want to make sure that that's in the record.
There's height. The solar array, that's mounted on the roof has specific height requirements, not only in terms of total height, but in terms of the height of the array, in terms of how high it can actually be placed on the roof.
Okay. Understood. So we'll move on to the stormwater.
Wherever we want to move on.
Going to stormwater. So as Mr. Malenik indicated, the DEP changed the game on us and instituted new rules in the beginning of March. It was March 3rd. So the new rules, and I do believe, they were drafted the year prior, but not enacted until March 3rd. And I know that LopatCong actually got a little bit ahead of the game and with their stormwater management rules and implemented, pretty close to exactly what the DEP is requiring us to do. So we recognize that, and we did our best under our plan to adhere to those rules. So, I'll go through just the basics. They're somewhat complex when it comes now to more so for water quality and how you deal with water quality. We can't put in those big concrete structures with filters underneath. We have to go to more natural means. That's really the basis of the change. And that natural means is by providing more open ponds, whether it be sand filters, constructed wetlands, infiltration basins. The one aspect that they did put in there, which is not a more natural feature, is pervious pavement. We can put that into play with respect to our design for water quality. So we have a mix of everything in here in the plan, basically. With one other unique aspect, which we're allowed to provide based on the size of our total drainage area, is the wet pond. But unlike the development, we'll go back to BP 78 and building number 7 across Route 22. That wet pond, that was played a big part in the water quality aspect. We got water quality out of the wet pond. We're not allowed to get water quality out of the wet pond under the new rules. So that makes me put my cap on and really, earn my keep with Bridge to be able to get a drainage design here with respect to the new rules. And so we keep the wet pond for quantity, and I'm showing it blue because it's going to stay wet. It will be lined because we're in a karst area here. So similar to what's on that other building, we'll have a liner within that pond, and the majority of stormwater will go to that location before discharge to what you see the letter, I guess the cutout of the letter E in the woods. That's the preliminary layout of our discharge points from that wet pond, the overflow from that wet pond, okay? The other aspects that are put into play are just to the east of that wet pond, we have essentially will be a water quality pond. How that's specifically designed just yet as a sand filter, it may be broken up into a couple sections as well, because the DEP, one other aspect of the rules is they basically told us that you take your large site, instead of putting everything to one water quality feature and treat it and then contain it and discharge it, you now have a maximum of 2.5 acres. So find 2.5 acre segments of your property and break them up and put them to your water quality feature. With the only caveat that, again, with pervious pavement, there's a little bit of a different calculation on how we use impervious pavement and the maximum area. It's basically 3 times the area of pavement, of pervious pavement that I'm putting in. I can bring 3 times that amount of pervious pavement area to the pervious pavement. It can be more than the 2.5 acres. So I have a water quality basin to the east. I have a water quality basin in the loop road, showing another little water quality area in the north, between the trailer stalls in the green area. I believe I have another water quality basin in the northwest corner to try and take on runoff from the employee parking spaces and drive aisle. And then I actually even have another little water quality basin feature that I'm going to look to put just before the wet pond as well. And within the trailer loading areas, I will be introducing some pervious pavement to deal with water quality. Also, because we do recognize we are discharging to Lopatcong Creek, which is C1 waterway, I not only have to just I don't have to deal with the basic minimum of 80% TSS removal or total suspended solids removal. That's the quality terminology there, but I need to go to 95%. And the only way I do that is by putting in water quality treatment in series. So I get 80% out of one essentially, and then I move it to another, get additional treatment. And so we are basically bringing water to basins, to basin, to pond. Similarly, it'll probably go from pervious pavement to basin, to pond. We're going to break it up into the segments to meet their requirements. Now, each of these features will also be lined because of the karst situation. And so we will have that put into place. We do have some final stormwater testing that needs to be done. So the arrangement and size of the basins might change a little bit. And that'll also be with our calculations for the recharge requirement that DEP requires as part of this. We need to do some confirmation of the soils here in the area to prove the recharge calculations work for the DEP rules. But that's it in a general nutshell. I can provide more detail if you want, but hopefully that gives you a general idea of what we're looking to do to be able to take water and bring it. But one last piece is that the roof runoff, the roof runoff isn't being treated. So the roof runoff gets to go directly to that wet pond. That's not dirty water. The only water that we're basically treating, DEP cut us a little bit of a break here. We normally would have looked at all the, had to look at all of our landscape areas, everything outside the building that was going to a pond, dealing with treatment for that area. They basically said, well, look, you can discount your landscape areas, even your pedestrian sidewalks. They're not dirty. It's really, we're worried about the vehicle travel areas. So that's the impervious coverage that we are treating in this plan. Okay. Next, I'll move to utilities.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I know that you have to confirm certain things.
Right.
Does that have the potential to impact the design of the overall site plan, including like the drive aisles, the building, the location of various features?
No, I don't think so, only because what we did in our background due diligence and coming up with our plan, we went conservative and just looked at first and foremost, we wanted to make sure that the volume of stormwater coming off this was going to fit in the pond. And we checked that box. Now it's just a matter of how we're going to tweak the water quality measures to get the areas distributed. And honestly, the fact that we can put in the pervious pavement route, if I am short based on the open area basins that I'm showing, what I have 5 or 6 of them in the plan, I can throw an additional pervious pavement in areas, and then that water goes through the pavement into a collection system, which will be lined below that, goes in, and that gets pushed off to one of these systems and goes. So I can mitigate it that way.
Yeah, so following on that, I guess, so that generally you're not going to have to wholesale reconfigure parking lots and things like that.
No.
Might you add additional, like smaller, like you did on building 7, we keep referring to that?
Right.
There's like pocket rain gardens and things
Yes.
like that throughout the site.
Right.
To treat like the passenger vehicle parking areas and things like that.
Yes, and in fact, since you brought it up, that was something that was brought up by Highlands, and so we recognize, similar to what was done on the other project, that we will probably be introducing some additional features within the landscaped areas of the parking lot to accommodate Highlands. And I also believe it was brought up in your professionals letters as well.
But we don't have that on the plan yet.
Not yet, but yeah, it'll be just, again, what it'll come down to is, it's going to, if you've been over to the building there, it's little pockets of rain gardens that'll that equate to maybe a couple parking spaces in width. We have various landscape islands and areas surrounding the building where we can pull runoff to create those features.
The measures you're talking about now, though, are separate and distinct from the recharge deficit that's associated with the hydraulic unit. We'll talk about that later.
Well, with the hydraulic, I'm not following you there with the last part. You're talking.
One of the conditions was off-site measures to make up for the recharge deficit.
Well, right.
In
If the site,
that HUC, they call it, right?
In the HUC 14,
Yeah.
right, which is if the recharge is even happening, because we looked at soil maps, the soils here are questionable as far as, we have an upper layer, it looks like it's okay, but it may not necessarily be great below.
But then you'd have to go to off-site measures.
Well, yeah, we also have the cars, there's a caveat in the rules.
But
with
then
respect to
there's
cars not
non-structural
having
measures,
recharge.
there's things you can do with the water company and ordinances that the town can pass and so on.
Well,
right?
we need to start first with respect to the soils.
Yeah, but
and
to
establishing
satisfy
those
that
areas.
condition, you have to take it to completion, correct?
If we-
It says right in there, you can't put a shovel in the ground until these things are done.
No, understood. And we're only here for preliminary. So we've got the standpoint of taking this plan, and we've done the basics to know that our volumes, our basin areas are adequate. If we need to, from a recharge standpoint, we know that we've taken a look at the soil study preliminarily to understand what's there. We need to do the additional soils testing, which we'll have done and finalized prior to final approval. And so any tweaks that need to be made or adjustments that need to be made with respect to recharge quality or quantity will be done for that plan.
Well, I don't know if I'm really satisfied with that yet, but
Okay.
go ahead.
It's really not unlike what we've done for other projects. When we're
I
looking
mean,
at
they're
preliminary.
talking about incentives for conservation plumbing and everything that can be done to make up for this deficit.
Right, but recognize that That's a broad for all areas of New Jersey statement. So when
I
you're
get
dealing
that.
with, right, and so areas that are.
But does it not say that you can't build that project until that's in place?
No, the thing is if I so show that the soils conditions here are of a poor condition, of a D condition or worse, then.
They're not talking about your site, though. They're saying a deficit in that hydraulic unit.
Right. That's if the
And
water's getting-
you have the option of correcting that on-site if that works,
Right.
or off-site. And off-site can be things like additional recharge and rain gardens, or it can be
Right.
incentives for plumbing, it can be water conservation with the water company, it can be ordinances, it can be a whole host of things.
No, you're absolutely right in what it says, but that's if there's a deficit. So if we show in the.
So you're arguing with their conclusion that there is a deficit?
No, what I'm saying is that every site's on a case-by-case basis. So if I'm dealing with.
But they're
a
talking
site-
about the whole hydraulic unit. They're saying a project within a hydraulic unit that shows a deficit.
Right. That shows a deficit.
Yes.
That's
The
case.
unit, the
Right.
unit, not the site, the unit.
No, right, but I'm part of the unit, and if I'm in there and I'm showing that that water is not getting essentially in and recharging in, okay, and again, this is something that has carried over still from the old rules. So if I prove that the existing condition isn't providing the recharge, okay, that isn't providing recharge, then I'm showing no deficit. So the onus on us though is providing the testing in multiple areas, and we would be providing multiple testing anyway. I have to do multiple testing more so than previously because I'm testing in each one of these basin locations. So I'm essentially testing for stormwater recharge all around the site, whereas previously we would just end up testing in the lower area of the site. So we have to go through that process, and that will certainly be part of our application to the DEP. Remember, this does go to the DEP, so I'm intending to submit a report that would be complying with the new DEP rules.
I'm not sure because for that hydraulic unit, it's been declared severely deficient
Okay.
By the Highlands. They're requiring us not to approve anything until that is in place. Has to be resubmitted to the Highlands before we can deem it complete or acceptable. You know, I don't know how it's going to be handled. It would have to go to some severe measures that require, that deficit to be overcome. I really don't know how to handle it, other than that's what the Highlands have told us we have to do.
Okay, with this, and I know, and I do read what the Highlands did say, and I've spoken with Highlands, and they understand and seen generally what our drainage, proposal is, and I fully expect that we would undergo a similar review to what we did on the other building with Highlands, which will follow, again, will be following the state rules. So again, if there's a deficit, then we will need to, if there ends up being a deficit.
Here's
we'll
what
have
I'm
to
getting
follow
at, and maybe we can't solve this tonight, but I'm looking at condition number 3 on your revised Highlands review.
Okay.
And it says, in lieu of on-site recharge, the applicant shall be responsible for providing for mitigation of the groundwater recharge volume off-site, preferably within the same HUC 14 sub-watershed, to provide for mitigation since on-site conditions are not conducive, which is, you've already said. A copy of the mitigation plan, including an implementation and maintenance plan, shall be submitted to the Highlands Council on approval of the township engineer. And then it goes on to say, there's a hierarchy within the same development site where feasible, the same HUC 14 subwatershed, or an interrelated HUC 14 subwatershed. And then I don't know, the governor's executive order and the Highlands said nothing shall be done until this mitigation plan is in place. So as a minimum, this requires further explanation to me.
Okay.
What you've said, I understand what you said, but I don't think it addresses the condition. I don't see how it relates to the condition in your consistency letter.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, just so we're clear, the The purpose of the preliminary is so that we can put an application before this board for its preliminary approval. Now, the intent of the Highlands Act is so that we can't put a shovel in the ground until both the township engineer and the Highlands have opined on it. So we're not going to be back for a final until that's actually been done. Fred, am I incorrect in that statement?
No,
So I understand the board's concern that nothing shall be done, but I think that's an overreading of what shall be done is. What shall be done is really putting the shovel in the ground. Otherwise, we can't even appear before this board for a preliminary approval without having the Highlands look at our full site plan, which may change before we come in for
I
final.
appreciate your viewpoint, but from our viewpoint, there have been so many things coming up with a 32-page checklist from our engineering group here, and especially I want to hear you address the lack of wastewater for your area, and how do you propose to solve it?
Okay. Well, I'm going into utilities, so I'll touch on that. I'll touch on that now. So,
I'm sorry, Mr. Skip.
Yep.
I just have one further question.
Right.
Just to follow up on our comments regarding stormwater
Right.
On the site and the design of the facilities to be in compliance with the current stormwater rule. Part of that requirement or part of the new BMP manual requires that wet ponds utilize or enact an adaptive reuse or beneficial reuse of the site's water quality runoff volume. Are you proposing to do that in this? I know we have a revised site plan at this time.
right,
But is that something you're going to be doing as well?
yes.
Okay, so that'll be through what, through like a irrigation, or are you proposing something else
Well, yeah, no,
on site?
you're talking about, sorry,
This is something different other than groundwater recharge, just generally speaking. Are you still going to leave the wet pond in place?
yes, we're leaving the wet pond in place.
And meet all the requirements of the BMP manual?
Right, that's our intention,
Okay.
correct, yes, yes.
I'm just curious, just because this is engineering, it's really beyond my field, but I just want to know, for the purposes of the discussion moving forward, the reference to the Highlands consistency and the water recharge deficit concern, is there a potential that it will impact the design of your site plan?
Again, I don't believe it would, because what we can do, again, how we've gotten here is we've done the initial rough look at what soils are in the area, and we know that they're questionable. So what we do think is that we're going to be looking at not as much of a deficit in respect to recharge. We need to confirm that, but we did enough to show that we can get the basics of the new rules basically satisfied. So we know that through the features that we've provided, the multiple features we've provided, we can handle the quantity, we can handle the quantity. The questionable thing is the recharge, but there's two prongs here we need to take a look at with respect to that, and one is the karst, and the other is the type of soils that are currently here, and whether or not how much they are recharging water off this site. And so until that's finalized, and once that's finalized, yes, if we need to provide additional measures or areas for recharge on the property, we have those. I have the area on the eastern end. We have plenty of other green space where we can look to provide additional mitigation if necessary. So, given the flexibility in those open areas, I'm confident that we will have
Well, again, I go
minimal
back.
changes.
A plain reading to me, recharge is only one component of mitigation. They're talking about many other options here.
Right. Well, remember that one other thing in that same condition, if you go to go what they gave for the basis of the condition, if you flip the page, that the same development site where feasible is an option for this.
It is. It can be on site.
Oh, it can be on
If
site.
it's not feasible on site, then you
Right.
move on.
Right, correct.
To bigger areas and more options.
Right, correct. You're 100% right in that. If we're not able to do it on site, then we do so. But we've taken and created a plan that not only has areas where we can provide that recharge. Look, I can put it into the ground, but the question is going to be is when I end up looking and taking a look at karst, Do we want to put it into the ground? Am I able to get it into the ground? Is that something we want to do? That'll be a discussion, and is going to be a discussion not only with Highlands, but with DEP. And once we get into the final details of the design with the soil study, that question will be answered. The other part is the soils themselves, because the soils here, if questionable, and show a D soil level or worse, for that matter, even if portions of the site are D soils, okay? We get to subtract those out and show that those areas are not recharged. So I'm only recharging for a certain portion of the site. So there's a couple of different ways the equation can go once a soil study comes back. And that will, again, be part of the final design.
Do you know when that's going to happen?
We would look to do that, right, assuming we would receive an approval, we would have to negotiate. Well, part of the issue here is we've got solar field there. So it's also working within the solar field and the array still being active to get in there to do the soil testing in the appropriate location. So we would do that and then look to finalize the design.
And Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on Mr. Bryce's query.
Yes.
As he will advise you, if there are significant changes to the site plan as a result of this condition from the Highlands Council, then we've got to come back for an amendment preliminary approval. So nothing will in fact be done, which is the intent and purpose of the Highlands Act, which is that we don't put a shovel in the ground and actually start vertical development. So preliminary approval protects the township and ensures the continued compliance with these outside agencies. If this board was to look favorably upon the application for preliminary approval this evening, you could certainly make a condition of any preliminary approval that we must in fact meet all of the requirements of the outside agencies having jurisdiction, which includes the Highlands Council. You're still protected, the board is still protected, the township's still protected in so much as if there's a major change in the site plan under the municipal land use law, we will be required to come in with an amended preliminary approval. And Brett, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't anticipate a major change in the site design and layout, correct?
Right, that's correct.
So we don't anticipate having to come back for an amended preliminary, but rest assured, the board members should be comfortable in knowing if that is in fact required. You retain jurisdiction, not just for a rubber stamp final approval, which is not certainly the intent here. The intent is that you want us to comply with the outside agencies as well. And we can't come back for a final until we've actually met the conditions that the outside agencies place upon us. So unless there are any other questions, you were going to go to utilities.
Right.
So why don't we?
You have a different person for the.
No, I think Brett's going to.
Nope, I'll touch on those as well.
Thank you.
So I'll go through the easy ones. So electric is there, we've got gas there, water is there, sewer. So we did get the letter of April 22nd, 2021 from JMT and Mr. Madden. We did review that letter. I believe the letter leaves a couple open-ended questions. While it does state there's the potential for no capacity, it does raise a question about a 20,000 gallon allotment that may or may not be included in the calculation, that if it was not subtracted out, would note that there is capacity on the site. I do see how he came up with his calculations as well. He did it in his table, which starts on page 2. He does the calculation based on average daily flow. He does a 12-month rolling and a 3-month rolling averages in doing his calculations. I questioned how he came up with his numbers as well. It seemed like his numbers and calculations and how he came up with his averages were very conservative based on the data that was there. So he was seemed to have used a 1-month peak number of, for instance, on page 2, on January of 2019 as being the factor that drove the sewer flows way up, whereas every other month is significantly less, maybe 20%.
No, it's a peak 3-month rolling average. It's not 1 month. It happens to be the peak 3-month.
It's a 3-month rolling daily average, right, is what it is.
And I'll also say this is the exact same methodology that the Highlands did when they prepared our initial wastewater management plan, and it's still in place.
Right.
And it's the same methodology.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I'm raising another question that we haven't been able to speak to Mr. Madden about, and I'll end it with saying that.
Well, some of it, some of it we know right here. There is a dispute over 20,000 gallons, and you can't solve that. We have not solved it. The second thing is our recent flows have no flow coming from the mall, and that's what that 20,000 gallons was about. It was capacity that we transferred, and there's a dispute over the transferred to Pohat to serve our portion of the mall property. Mall property is closed now. It's, you see the second item on the agenda tonight. It's authorizing the need for redevelopment. Something will go there, and that capacity which they used in the past, have not used recently, will get used there again. And it may be more than 20,000 gallons, but that site will be served. And it's not there now because it's not in the numbers, but it's committed capacity.
Right. Understood.
The other thing is I really have no idea how you came up with your numbers. I would need more. When you go for your TWA, you have a number of employees. I don't know where that came from. I don't know whether that's for 3 shifts, 1 shift. There's no breakdown between office and warehouse. I mean, that sort of when you ask for 12,000 gallons, our engineer and this board expect to see calculations.
Yeah, that should have been, that was part, we broke down the number to come up with that amount, so.
But it hasn't been presented here.
Okay, well, I believe it was submitted as part of our request for.
And where did the number of employees, is that 3 shifts, 1 shift? What happens if you have more employees?
Yeah, I don't know offhand whether on shifts, how it's put in.
Right?
We can do that.
All right.
But one other point that I want to make, though, is that prior to this letter that we received, we did go to Phillipsburg. Now, Phillipsburg is the treating authority, and the agreement with Lopat is to go through Phillipsburg for treatment. And so I received and obtained a few months prior to receiving this letter, calculations from Remington and Vernick, who's the engineer for the plant, and getting an understanding as to not only what the flows were, what the allocations were, whether for projects that have been approved or whether there were other allocations that were essentially on the books and being held for certain properties, and what was left open. And that number is different than what is in here as well. So
who do you think knows more about that? Lopat?
I will defer, well, there might be, I guess, both. I'm going to say both. I guess there's shared responsibility.
Did you read our intermunicipal contract?
Right, and I did. I
know. Did you read our WMP?
I did not.
Did you read the area-wide water quality management plan? I'll go through it. Right in our WMP, the contractual limits are noted.
Okay.
And it notes the 20,000 gallon, dispute.
Right.
So.
My only point, Mr. Pryor, in bringing that up is the fact that I got numbers.
This board, I don't think is going to accept. He's not even here to testify, so we're going to go by the numbers we know.
Well, and by testimony, Mr. Pryor, it was just bringing up the point that I have the letter, I understand it.
Yeah.
That
letter's consistent with our WMP.
And I just wanted to bring up Phillipsburg because I had gotten different numbers. It raised the question in my mind, and I would love to be able to work and get a clear understanding as to the numbers and those calculations.
You realize the problem for the 30 days.
Now, I can quote from our WMP, the Township of Lopatcong has committed to ensuring all sewer flow commitments remain within the 801 GPD and maximum monthly flows as established by 2 contracts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 20,000 GPD of the 801 total may or may not be available pending resolution of contractual commitments. So that's right out of our wastewater management plan. So we don't necessarily have the freedom to depart from that.
Understood.
So let me touch upon a couple of other points as well. You've had an opportunity to review the other staff or the review letters.
I have.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's start with the June 18th Collier letter.
Yep.
First, is there any condition, other than what you've already testified to, that we cannot comply to? Level.
Let me just make sure that what I spoke to.
The comments start on page 6.
Right, I've gone through the letter, and the vast majority of the comments we can comply with. There's a handful that I have flagged with regard to provide, that we need to provide testimony to. I flagged as such, and for example, we touched base with Highlands and with respect to the consistency determination and how we will be addressing that through the implementation of the green infrastructure and dealing with groundwater recharge. We talked about the emergency access drive. That was on number 2.05 on page 7. The only other one was.
Mr. Skaffis.
Yep.
You mentioned, and we talked about the conflict between the site plan application that's been filed by NFI and this site.
Right.
And, you know, the existence or non-existence of an easement or an agreement in principle for an easement.
Right.
Are you aware, is the applicant aware or willing to work with NFI to create a unified plan that provides access for both sites, should the board in the future be inclined to grant approval for both sites, and create a unified access to Stryker's Road, including sanitary sewer, utilities, and driveway access for vehicles to both sites?
The utilities part is an easier coordination. The driveway access is something.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, in answering that question, I believe it's incumbent upon NFI to actually pursue those approvals or agreements with us and then present that to the board, because it's, ours is the encumbered property, so to speak. Theirs is the one that's looking for
So
the
if their
benefit
site,
of our property.
so it's your opinion that their site plan would have to then conform to your
Yes.
site plan?
Well, so that means no access at all, because that's what you're showing tonight.
Well, between,
You're showing no access for NFI. And I made that point at the beginning. You're showing no easement, you're showing an egress serving only your site, and that's your site plan. That's what would get approved. Now, how do you come back? How do they come back? You'd have to amend your site plan.
Here's the problem, I think. We do have NFI that has initiated an application. That is representing that they have that as access. And it's conflicting with your plan. Now, I understand that intellectually, your plan is your plan, NFI is their plan. However, this is a planning board, and the board has to be aware of planning concerns, and frankly, as even explained to NFI, bad planning. And it puts this board in a very difficult position because you have two applications that are simultaneous that are looking at access through a similar stock, and nobody's on the same page. And and ostensibly, NFI has permission, at least consent of the property owner for their application.
Mr. Chairman, the solution that I would propose is this. If the board's will is that we come to an agreement with NFI on an access point between now and the final approval, we can show that access point consistent with what NFI has on their plans. But for purposes of this preliminary approval process, number one, correct me if I'm wrong, this is not a major major site change that would require an amended approval, right?
From our standpoint, no.
Well, wait a minute, I'm not sure. If you're not gonna have two driveways side by side, then of course it would be a change in the site plan.
Okay. Excuse me, George, go ahead.
Well, you say that, but and I'm not an engineer, but I did look at your grading plan for that area of your site.
Exactly.
And you didn't reserve the easement, meaning that it's undisturbed. You put about a 6 to 10 foot cut right through the middle of that easement to gain access to Stryker's Road, which means that if you ever make a deal, the plans have to change. And if you don't make a deal, it doesn't, even if you make a deal so that they can go their own way, they can't build it without having a change here because you've graded their access out.
So this is a standalone application. There is no access that we're showing on this plan. If NFI comes to an agreement with us, then we're bound by the municipal land use law to come back before the board and show that access, whether it's as an amended preliminary approval or as part of a final approval. But this board can act today based on the site plan that it has before it. I understand the concern that this other property may be affected because there may be an agreement that requires, or may not require, because I'm not going to give a legal opinion here as to what the legal effect of that, it's not an easement, of that agreement to have an easement at some point in the future, what that obligates this applicant to do or the property owner to do. But for the board's purposes, I think, as the board attorney will advise the board, is that it's got to look at the application that is before this board, and it can't take into consideration another pending application that has not yet received an approval. We'd be having a completely different conversation if an adjacent property owner has received an approval for an access to this site or through this site, and we're here showing no access. That would be a completely different conversation, but that hasn't occurred yet.
But it is possible, council, that they could get an approval before you.
And it's possible that we would have to come back with either an amended preliminary approval or show it as part of a final approval.
You know what you submitted, it showed parallel driveways with overlapping aprons, and so, I mean, where do we stand with that document that you submitted last month, showing that easement, and it's not just a rectangle, it comes across the bottom. Your apron is actually encroaching on their easement. You have two parallel roads, overlapping aprons. I mean,
It severely affects the traffic.
yeah, what are you doing? Are you withdrawing that drawing from last month?
That drawing from last month, we were asked to show the agreement area. It was in the review, it was in the review comment, the completeness comments. Yeah.
That the plan should reflect the proposal by NFI.
Right.
And show how the two plans not coordinate, but conflict, I guess, with each other.
Right.
Your application tonight is one driveway serving your site, graded in a way that you show, right?
That's correct.
All right.
As for the compliance with the Highlands Council, that is also, this board is absolutely correct that we have to comply with these outside agencies, and it can act on a preliminary approval this evening and make a requirement of the preliminary approval that we obtain the outside agency approvals, including Highlands. So I'd like to reiterate that one point because I think that's important. I understand the board's caution, but the caution should be also tempered with the reality that we can't build until we get these outside agencies approvals, and certainly we can't build until we come back before this board and get a final approval. You continue to maintain jurisdiction and you continue to maintain control over this application process.
May I get the business about the outside agencies. Lawyers have explained this to me many times over.
I didn't mean to talk down.
No,
It came off that way.
I've had the case law explained to me and everything. But there are a couple things here that are internal. One is the sewer. I mean, you're going to have to get this worked out.
Correct.
And worked out with council. You haven't even been to council.
So our belief is that, and again, Mr. Pryor, we certainly, and through the chair, if I may, we certainly are not implying that the council is right or the township's right or that they're wrong. But we have simply noted to our expert that there's a discrepancy that we believe needs to be flushed out. Now, that discrepancy may end up being absolutely, as you've already alluded to, that there is an agreement and that we just don't have the sewer capacity there, which changes the complexion of any.
I'm going to go visit that one more time. It's our wastewater management plan, not Phillipsburg's. Those numbers that were used in that report, where do you think we get them from? We get a monthly report from P. Burke.
Mm-hmm.
So you can play with that you want, but you're gonna have to work this out with,
We will.
with Lopet people.
But that's not
I understand.
guaranteed.
I'm sorry?
But you're
The
not
other,
guaranteeing you're gonna work that out that way.
Well, we have to. We have to work it out, and we have to, we certainly can't build, and you won't give us a final approval unless we can show, yeah, there's capacity. Now, what we're asking for, and what's part of a preliminary approval process, is that we're showing the general design and what we're going to be building there, and it's always subject to not only the, the ability to have utilities serving that site, not only the outside agency approvals, but also whether there's sewer capacity in this case. So that remains a constant. As Mr. Skapanitz has testified, we believe that there is some area, at least to explore. And again, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on who's right or who's wrong. And I'm not saying, I don't think Brett's saying either, hey, we're absolutely right, you folks are wrong. But there is an area of ambiguity. We'd like to explore that. And the board certainly needs to be protected, knowing that if it grants a preliminary approval this evening, it's not losing control of the ability to say you didn't get the sewer capacity issue sorted out. You're not going to get a final approval. It can make a condition of a preliminary approval that we must show that there is sewer capacity.
well, I'm gonna say this and I'll be quiet. I favor, as much as possible, a clean final approval. One of the comments, we didn't even get one of the sheets. There's 100 things here where things aren't shown. To me, there's a point where you have to work the plans a little more. And we haven't even touched on the variances yet. So I don't favor a preliminary approval with 512 conditions attached that could have been fixed, right here. So that doesn't mean, they have to, there's more work to be done.
I understand that. I would certainly like to go through and I'll go through the reports with what is shown as, or called out as potential variances that we're seeking, and that we will comply with those conditions.
Okay, at this point, I'm gonna take a,
I got one question, based off what Joe's here, and I could be slightly wrong here, all right? I guess I'm asking you two, all right? And the board here. Was there an agreement that was made and council and the board here that we wouldn't move forward on a lot of things in this fashion unless the sewer was approved first and was there?
No,
And-
there's no agreement with council.
That was never brought in anywhere,
No.
right? Okay.
it's just a fact that.
Because it just
as
makes
I
a lot of
stated in
sense
the
to not be
beginning,
moving anywhere if you can't build.
This, you know how a planning board works, and it bases its decision on the testimony we hear tonight.
Right.
So there's no agreements for anything.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
All right, at this point, if you would allow, I'd like to take a 5-minute break, just to get back down to level position here. And I'll come back, and I'd like to remind everyone that the board at 10 o'clock will stop all of the testimony and retire for the evening, so.
It's probably gonna be a little bit sooner because you have that one other issue.
Okay.
Just
All right, so we'll take a 5-minute break, and anyone wants to take a bathroom break or something like that.
We're all heading to the same place.
Just to be mindful of the hour and to be respectful to the board as well, so we have a natural break. And also in reference to our planner, our engineer, our architect who came in from Chicago. What I'd like to do is take some testimony out of order. I don't think we're going to get through all of the testimony today.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask Mr. Skapanitz to keep his planner's hat off for now and just address the engineering, and we'll address the planning issues when, on a continuance date, because I don't think we're going to get to that tonight and still make
Okay.
that cutoff.
if he wants to. they could just bring up the architect to try to get her through it.
Do you want to
And
just
then
bring up
just-
the architect?
Well, let's finish with the engineering first, if you
Okay.
don't mind.
Council, that may take some time, and I just, if you want to get,
I'm gonna keep an eye on the clock. If we start to run real close, because I think that the architectural will be the most brief in terms of testimony,
all right,
I'll ask to cut off his testimony midway.
Very good.
just
That's
be
okay.
mindful that, and I don't want to speak for the chair, but we do have another piece of business. So I don't know exactly when the cutoff from the chair is going to be, but just build that into your,
And also, I have no idea if members of the audience, what kind of questions they're going to have for the engineer.
Right. So I'll be mindful of that and maybe give it a little bit more room than I normally would. I know that you probably need at least 15 minutes, I heard someone say, for your other application, or for your other,
It's just a point of
agenda
business that we could dismiss the, go into executive session on it. There's nothing that has to be,
so I'll use that 9:45 as sort of
Sure.
an absolute cutoff.
I would appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So
Please.
Brett, let's get back to first the engineering report that you
Right.
received.
Correct.
Okay? So let's go through that and just make sure that there are, in terms of what we can comply with,
Right.
cannot comply with. Let's address
Right,
that.
I'm just going to go page by page. We're at page 7, talk 2.03, which is related to the NFI driveway. We just ended with that. 2.05 was another point to mention, which was the access drive, and we talked about that earlier in testimony. Page 8, if I'm not mentioning any other comments, I'm basically insinuating that we can comply. Page 8, I only want to note that 3.01, our comments will provide as part of the final site plan application. They're part of the final site plan checklist, not preliminary. That's why they were not in the plan. 3.03, we talked about already. This is the additional berming to the rear of the site that we agreed we would look to provide and provide cross sections to. I'll flip now to page 9. Page 9 talks about, it's getting into stormwater management, and I provided extensive testimony at the bottom of 3.04, talks about providing the green infrastructure and modifications to meet the requirements, which we intend to do so, and come back with the additional details in our final plan.
May I come back to one of the things you
Yeah.
mentioned? You were talking about 3.03.
Right.
That's the gravel road that I think we generally agreed we'd like to have removed.
Removed. Right, correct. To flip to page 10, we can comply or meet each of the comments here. I did just do note that there are a couple items in here with respect to specific cross sections and details related to utilities that are actually part of the final site plan checklist and not preliminary. That's the only reason why they were in the plan, and we would look to provide those in the final site plan application. Page 11, the only item I'll talk to, we talked to this as 3.07. We talked about the sanitary sewer capacity question. Other than that, 3.08C was again additional profiles of utilities that really are part of the final site plan checklist now. That's why we're not in the plan. To move to page 12, I'll move to comply with everything, go to 4.5. Talks about the number of trees within parking areas, and that we don't meet the minimum requirement. This is something we did and we feel we do meet it. We did an update, and I have an exhibit, that we prepared. I don't have it with me, but we identify that we meet the total number. In fact, I believe we exceed it when we talk about not only the trees within the parking area, but trees around the perimeter. So I believe we're within compliance for the number of trees within the parking lot.
and you'll submit that before.
Yes, we will submit that to show that proof of that. Then item 4.06, which is talking about the area of open space. This is also in Mr. Ritter's letter. And I'm not going to get into detail with his letter yet, but this is a comment which believes a variance may be required based on the total landscape area. While we do believe we meet the intent with the total amount of landscaping around the perimeter of the parking lot, but with respect to providing additional plantings in the parking area, while our plan doesn't show it, the result is I'm going to take the parking area and I'm going to shift it further to the east, closer to the residential. So while our plan has that, it doesn't show that in the plan now. And ideally shows the need for a deviation based on the total, not having the landscaped islands in there. We'll comply. We'll shift the parking, move it, and add the additional landscaping interior. But I'm just bringing up the notion that having it set up in our plan the way it is provides a little bit more separation of the parking from the residential to the east.
So it would push the parking back, right?
It would push the parking back away if I added in the additional landscaping to add in the additional square footage. That's all.
So, but you're going to provide more robust testimony as to that when we go.
When we get into the variances, correct. Section 5, I'm going to leave to our traffic engineer, so I'm going to leave that entirely out, which goes to page 14 and talks about gets into geology and geotechnical issues. And I talked to this a bit already. We know we need to provide an updated information with regards to the soil study, and we intend to do so in submission for final. Miscellaneous, there are all the comments in there we can comply or agree with. So
Before you sit down, I have one last question for the board. Did we decide on sidewalk or will we or no? I always make a proposal and include sidewalk along one of these major developments.
Comments from George? Adam? About placing sidewalks?
This is along Strikers Road.
Strikers Road, yeah.
Well, from a planning point of view, as the area expands, and particularly with the addition of all these new improvements, as you know, in the other warehousing, we did provide one sidewalk on the principal street that ran through it so that it connected everybody up. I don't think it's an unreasonable request as long as the board's comfortable with that. We did require that on 22.
For the Ingersoll Rand site.
Yes, on the interior road, we connected everybody up with a sidewalk on one side.
Maybe advantageous with the amount of truck traffic going to be generating through these areas that we don't want people in the roadway at the time, especially getting down to the recreation areas down by the creek and.
Yeah, well, there's sufficient traffic on Strikers Road that you wouldn't want anybody in the roadway.
Exactly.
I agree, and if you think of it as employees or people wanting to walk back and forth or even jog or exercise, at lunchtime if they want to get out, having some type of access along Strikers Road pedestrian-wise, I think makes some sense.
Okay.
Where I stand, so. I'll tell you what, I'll make that motion that we include the requirement for sidewalks.
I'll second.
Okay. Take a roll call vote on that, Beth?
Okay, members Coyle,
Yes.
Fryer,
Yes.
Sampson,
Yes.
Weeks,
No.
Mayor Mengucci,
yes,
Chairman Van Vliet.
Yes. So you are
Revise it to show side.
reporting the site plan to include sidewalks along Strikers Road then.
And that would be a condition of any preliminary approval if the board wants to consider that, we understand.
Okay.
Brett, I think we've concluded the engineering testimony. We'll defer the planning testimony to after our architect.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if the board members and the public obviously have any questions, as an engineer.
Very good. Of the engineer's testimony, not the planning. Any questions from the board or?
I don't have any further questions.
George?
I have no further questions at this time.
Duncan? Good. Good. Okay,
I'm sorry,
Doug.
I do have one. I noticed in the review letter, you've agreed that you would provide some of those cross-sections. Could you bring those to the next meeting, coming from the overlook down through the site?
Yeah.
So we can have, the board can have a sense of that?
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll open the questioning up to any members of the public that would like to question anything on his testimony here. Don't go too far afield. Seeing none, I'll close the public portion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please
Mr.
continue.
Chairman, with your permission, if I may call our architect.
Yes, absolutely. Straight into Chicago.
Sorry about it.
Take your time.
I can swear you in real fast.
Okay.
Just raise your right hand. You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give the board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Please state your name, spell your last for the record.
Antonia Lorian, Antonia, Lorian, Laurean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Ms. Lorian, give the board members, if you would, the benefit of your credentials or education as a professional architect.
Yes. I am a graduate from Illinois Institute of Technology in the south side of Chicago. It's a 5-year program. I'm a licensed architect in New Jersey, and I've got about 22 years of experience as an architect. I've testified before other boards here in New Jersey as well.
And the boards that you testified to, I believe that one of them was Newark, is that correct?
Newark, as well as next door, Phillipsburg.
Okay. Let's just use those two as an example where you accepted as an expert in the field of architecture in those two boards.
Yes, I was.
And since you first got your license as an architect in New Jersey, up to now, have your credentials changed in any way?
No, they have not.
I would ask that you be accepted as an expert in the field of architecture.
She's accepted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, you're familiar with the application and the plans that have been submitted to the board, including the architecturals, which are done under your direction. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. If you would give the benefit of the architectural plans, let's talk about what the site's going to look like, what the buildings are going to look like, and what we're proposing aesthetically in terms of this proposed development. And we pre-marked this as A3.
I was going to ask you if you've done that.
Yes, A3 is the colored elevation, and I believe A4 is going to be the perspective rendering of the building corner.
So I'll put A4 down here for now. If you want
Perfect.
to start with
Yes.
A3? Go ahead and tell us what A3 represents.
A3 represents the 4 building elevations. Actually, north and south elevations are going to pretty much mirror each other. This building is a cross-dock building, about 877,019 square feet in area. It is, the exterior facade of the building is insulated precast concrete panels with reveals and paint accents. The corners are emphasized with glass features, and they're on all 4 sides of the corners, as seen in.
Let's put up A4.
Yes.
I'll take down A3.
Thank you. As seen in the rendering of the corner entrance there. So, and the glazing, as well as the clear story windows that go around the building, are insulated glazing, tinted, so it is better than your normal see-through glazing to reflect some of the heat gain. The clear story the roof is a TPO membrane, white membrane roofing, which also helps reflect some of the heat better than most of the standard EPDM membrane roofing that, tends to retain a lot of the solar heat. I think Brett did a really good job of explaining the site. I don't know if you want me to go back through that, but I think he did a pretty good job of explaining the site. I just want to add that the lighting, both exterior and interior, will be the new energy efficient LED lights. That's become industry standard now. And we will also have a energy efficient HVAC system inside the building.
So let me touch upon a couple of points that I think the board had made some inquiry. First of all, as to the height of the building.
So, yes, so on A3, you can see this is a preliminary elevation. Of course, once we get into structural, so we aired a little bit more on the side of higher than we usually go higher and knowing that we'll come down as soon as structural is set. But I believe the highest point will be at the apex or in the middle point of the north and south elevation. The roof will shed out to the east and west sides. And I believe that is at 50 feet above finished floor. So that's the apex. There, most of the even elevation of the building, which is the east and west, that is about 46 feet.
Okay. Now, the maximum permitted height in this zone is 60 feet. And we've also had testimony about relocating some of the solar panels to the rooftop.
We will be under that.
Okay. Now, rooftop equipment that's proposed, can you cover that for us?
Oh, yes. So the rooftop equipment will likely hide most of the bigger units will hide in the corners behind the parapets at the entrance. That's where we usually keep the office designs. So that's where most of the rooftop units will be concentrated. Anything else, it will be well within. I mean, it's a pretty deep building. You won't be seeing anything, and it won't be exceeding 10 feet in height for the rooftop units.
I'm sorry, how high are the parapets?
The parapets at the corner entry are about 36, 42 inches.
All right, and these solar panels, they have to be higher than that, right?
Yes, but we won't exceed the 60-foot height requirement. This is the parapet more
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, it's a beautiful roof line. It's nice and clean. I love it. But when these solar panels go on there, some people will be able to see them, right?
Some, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, you indicated you have a parapet on top. You're going to have the actual structural support of the roof. The exterior panels are basically, that won't be load bearing.
Right. They will, the structure's designed, it won't be the solar panels will be bearing on the interior roofs. I mean, we won't be connecting to the.
Yeah, and we don't really create height on those either.
Right.
This would be like a roof mount. We're not
Yes.
looking for a clearance.
All of it would be.
Yeah, I guess that's my question. Are they going to lay flat on the roof like you see on rooftop?
No,
or are they going to be,
No, I mean, as roof panels, they are inclined a little bit to, and it is I'm not a solar panel expert, but they do, depending on the region and the orientation of the building, they'll adjust accordingly. But I don't see them coming up,
You're not looking at a rotating type system where we're going to be following the sun around these.
No.
Pretty much flat panels.
Flat panels with a slight incline to.
30-degree angle to
Yeah.
get the correct sun.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Unit on a roof, and 8-foot elevation.
Should above it, yeah. But the panels, I don't think will go that high.
Yeah, I know.
So, okay,
Yeah.
have a better clarity.
Okay.
See what we're doing here.
Okay.
Just for my own, I'm sorry.
No, I apologize.
Just for my own information, are you going to be reusing the panels that were there? Or are you going to get newer technology on the top?
Sure. Why don't we have Mr. Vladeck address those points, if I can call him very briefly. He's already.
No, so just for my own information, I mean.
Sure.
Okay.
So actually, at my prior employ, I installed about 20 megawatts of solar systems, roof systems on buildings. They are a ballasted system, and the panel itself is arguably 36 inches, but they are placed on an angle based on the location and the position of the sun. But at the top, it's 24 to 30 inches off of the roof membrane itself. So they're not straight up, they don't rotate anything thereabouts.
Okay. I was just wondering if you were going to reuse the panels that were already there.
So the current owner, as part of the transaction, mandated that he puts his panels back on our roof. So it's his system, it's not us, because we don't even gain benefit from this. It goes to the buried plastics building, which is a whole other story because they're not there. I have a contract that says this is what happens, so, but they're still paying the current owner of that for the power that they're not using. But that's what it serves. We don't get a benefit. It's an accommodation to the current owner of the systems, and that's really what it is.
Is he going to own those panels?
They do that.
And they'll own them on your roof?
Yes. We'll enter into a roof lease for the priceless sum of $1.
Okay.
And he gets to keep them there and generate electricity, yes.
I'm just wondering because those panels are getting to be a little long in the tooth.
Yeah, that's a whole other question. That's why I'm staying out of that.
Okay.
And just out of curiosity, the panels on the building itself, are they made on the site or are they transported?
I believe these are prefabricated panels, so they're not tilt-up panels on the site. So yeah, they'll be trucked in.
And numbered.
So let me ask you, in terms of the architectural features of the building, what if any features are we having that will break up the mass of the building?
Well, we've got some of the height differentiation at the corners, as well as we've got paint patterns to break up the long mass of the long span of that precast wall elevation on the east and west panels. I mean, on the east and west sides.
And in terms of the materials that are being used, can you provide us some general detail, since we don't know who the tenant is, maybe some specifics in terms of signage and so forth, but just in general details about the colors that will be employed?
So most of the base color, the field color is, I believe, it's the Sherwin-Williams passive gray color. It's a lighter gray color, but it does hide some of the imperfections in the precast, so you won't be seeing any of the, it won't be as noticeable. And then we go into light and then move to the medium and then the darker gray colors as accents. And then we have a pop of blue, which is, I believe, Bridges' signature color, which is the Loyal Blue by Sherwin-Williams.
Okay. Now Brett will be bringing a cross-section of the continuance state to show what the view will be from both the residential area and maybe even street view. But can you give the board at least some idea of what it is they'll be looking at in terms of the building itself if they were standing on the street, and then some 400 feet away at Overbrook? Is that 600 feet away at Overbrook? Given the change in elevation, what do you believe the residents in that area will be looking at?
So the change, it's not going to be as monstrous as it seems because you're dropping, the site drops off at the south end and, on Overland, you're up higher than down at the south side of the building there.
So the street view is essentially they'll be looking at the burning and
yes.
the trees that are there.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so it's a 3-story development. So if you're standing on the roof for some reason, this 3-story development, can you give us some idea of what it is that you might be able to see?
From you would probably look at the, sorry, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, 3 stories up, and for some reason you're on the roof of the 3rd story.
Of the 3rd story looking at the building?
Right.
Oh, so you would probably be looking at somewhere at the elevation of the parapet there, the top of the parapet, the top of the building, probably above that accent gray band that runs at the top of the building. You won't really see the HVAC rooftop units. They're not the monstrous units that they used to be in the early 90s and 2000s. They've actually come down a lot in size and they're more compact. so you won't be staring at that, but there will be a white roof. If you really get up high enough, you will see the white roof of the building.
The idea is to minimize the visual impact from street level and from a reasonable height.
I believe
within the
we,
units.
I believe we do.
Counselor, if I could, to make sure I understand your question, and she understands this question. You're saying if you were on the roof level of those condominiums at the rear of the site, is that what you're talking about? Okay, so if you go to the rear of the site,
Okay.
across from that are condos that are 3 stories high. So there's a difference in elevation.
There's a difference in elevation. At the south side there, you will be looking at, I believe there's a retaining wall. Sorry, can I pull up Brad?
Yeah, let's put up A1.
A1, yes.
Maybe I can speak a bit, just because it's got to deal with grades.
Yes.
That's a bit clearer. So I can, if we look at, with the building height being at 50, let's say 50 feet.
Yeah.
And those residential units, if we were standing on the top of them, we're probably standing on the roof at probably close to 50, probably 40 feet. If we're on the roof, it's a 3-story building,
Yeah.
give or take. There's a change in elevation. So if you were standing in the north east corner of our property at Overlook and looking straight down at the building from that roof, you're looking probably at, you're probably looking at just above the blue band. Is where your eye level is going to be. There's about a 26-foot differential in elevation from here to here.
Yes.
At that location.
Yeah.
When we get down to the bottom in the southwest corner though, because our property drops down, this elevation here is not too far off the elevation of the building in this corner. So if you're standing on that roof line here, okay, you're probably staring, you're now even with the first floor of the building, so you're probably looking more now at the parapet of this building. Follow?
I do.
So,
Cross sections.
Yeah, the cross sections are gonna.
But it's not like a blank wall right up against those property lines. It's going to be 600-foot buffer coming down.
yes.
So you'll have a green way there.
Yes. And you'll have, not only that, but I mean, the change in the site at the south, I think with the retaining walls there, I think it'll give it that south view, that more step down feeling and not less of just a flat wall. It'll give it some 3D change there because you've got landscape at one elevation, landscape at the second wall, and then you've got your retaining pond at the bottom. So I think, the buffer up on Overland, and we talked about those berms that were mentioned as part of the approval process. I think you will have change in texture for the trees and the bushes that will be planted there that'll impact your view before you get to the east or west, to get to the east elevation.
Mr. Chairman, that would conclude my questioning of architect,
Okay.
board members, and public.
Thank you. Any questions? Jim? Any questions from the architect?
No, I'm comfortable with it.
You all like Sherwin-Williams Royal Blue then?
I guess there is one question. There is no signage in the package. I assume that that's something you'll come in with later, in terms of signage on the building.
Right.
I know you have a freestanding sign located, but on the building, there is no signage being proposed at this time, at least.
That's correct. So we would have to comply with the ordinance in terms of the signage height and so forth and size and so forth. But if we need a variance, we have to obviously come back to the
Understood. That's fine.
Anyone else on the board have questions? If not, I'll open it up to the public. Is there anyone from the public that has questions for our architect? Seeing none, we'll close the public questioning of the witness. Thank you very much.
Thank
Nice
you.
presentation.
Mr. Chairman, it is now 9:32 or so. I think calling the next witness would probably run us past that 9:45 time.
Okay.
So with your permission, what I'd like to do is take a break at this point. I would ask, however, that if it's carried to the next hearing day, I don't know that I'll be able to bring our architect back. So with your permission, I would ask that she be excused and not required to come back.
Absolutely.
I have no issue.
No objection to that, absolutely. She's provided our testimony, it's on record. We can always refer back to that if we have to. We just hope that Sharon Williams can produce enough royal blue.
So, Mr. Chairman, I don't know what the board's policy is. Perhaps we should inquire as to the continuance date?
Yes, absolutely. The continuous date will be the August meeting. I have your proposed next door neighbors coming in for the July meeting. And I probably would say it was going to be a long meeting also, like this evening was. So,
just so I can mark down the date, so I don't have to
Yes,
bother her in the morning.
we have,
28th?
It's the second, 28th is July.
Fourth Tuesday, fourth Wednesday.
Oh, August, he's coming in August.
Yes, it's
25th,
25th.
August 25th.
Yeah, 25th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
we'll need a motion to authorize the continuance of the day. Do I hear one?
I'll make it.
Is there a second?
Yeah.
Beth, roll call, please.
Member Toil. Yes. Pryor.
Yes.
Sampson.
Yes.
Meek.
Yes.
Mayor Mendocino.
Yes.
Chairman Bender.
All right, for members of the public, this hearing is being carried to Wednesday, August 25th, 7 PM here. There will be no further notice required, so this is your notice. You're not going to be getting anything more in the mail.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Right.
Keep these or take them?
Leave them here for now, unless you need them for some type of.
User exhibits.
Do you prefer to be stripped and folded, or do you want the whole board?
You can store them right up here, still be light.
They want it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he's saying this is,
Oh, you can leave it.
make it smaller, so that'll be bigger. Then they.
Good night, thanks again.
Good night. Have a good one. Thank you very much.
Safe travels.
That's it. Everybody else.
Okay. Moving on to our next order of business. This is new business. No action required. Well, I should say there should be some action, I guess. Under new business, the council has authorized the planning board to undertake a review of the redevelopment plan for the old Phillipsburg Mall. So, George, I think.
Yes,
We're gonna-
basically, actually, time
Could,
flies.
George, could you speak up a little bit? My battery just
Oh,
died here.
okay. Back in January, the council requested that the planning board undertake a study to evaluate about 21 properties on the Route 22 frontage to determine if they were in need of redevelopment. That report has progressed along, and it should be available by the end of next week to be sent up here for the planning board's use and also over to council to review it, but to begin the process of determining whether these sites are in need of redevelopment, and then if they are found to be that way, we can then move ahead and proceed on to developing an actual redevelopment plan for those properties that are found to be in need of redevelopment. And basically the study is going to look at all 21 properties. There is well, since we're drafting the report, obviously the report is going to come out that not all 21 are in need of redevelopment. There will be a lesser number, but it's better that we just wait till you get the report and have a chance to look at it. The next step in the process would be the planning board to informally, well, not informally, but at one of their regular meetings, review the report. And then after having an opportunity to review it, and when it's appropriate, the board would then schedule a public hearing. If at that hearing, the planning board finds in favor of whatever in need of redevelopment sites we identify, that would be referred to council, which council then would hold their own public hearings and discussions and officially find the properties in need of redevelopment or not. That's up to them. But that's where we're at. The report should be, like I say, available toward the end of next week. We'll provide copies to the board to begin their review and also to council so they have a sense of where we've went. And we can begin that process.
I have a question, George. In the process, are we supposed to notify the individual owners of the sites being studied?
Oh, yes, they will be clearly notified, and one of the things that the board, and we haven't had a chance to discuss this, may want to do is invite the infected property owners to come in and actually be involved in the discussions before any formal action is taken. Because clearly, whatever we decide can be very personal to the properties that are involved. And also, any redevelopment plan to be successful, in all honesty, you have to have the buy-in of some of the property owners, because this is being directed at groups of properties. So I would hope that we would actually have them come in, and then, of course, as part of the public hearings, they would, whether they attend or not, they would be noticed anyhow of the process and be involved. We did try to contact all of them while we were trying to collect information, all the owners. We were successful with some, and some we just couldn't make contact with. So some of them are today even aware that we're undertaking the process. But that was not unanimous. We weren't able to get the phone numbers of the actual owners in many cases. And so I would say that we managed to contact personally probably about 50% of them. But yes, they would be involved in the process.
So just to make sure I understand the process, the first step now, the resolution that council passed was to have the planning board with you.
Yes.
Conduct this first study, which is simply the properties in need of development. There's criteria in the law.
Yes.
They meet one of the criteria, then they're in need of redevelopment.
Yes.
And that's the end of that first phase. The actual preparation of a redevelopment plan would be the next phase.
Would be the next phase. Yeah. What we're now doing is really just trying to identify the properties that we consider in need of redevelopment. There's no plan, there's no proposal for rezoning or anything like that. It's just we think these properties warrant closer look and should be considered for redevelopment. Obviously, the planning board and the council may look at some of them, and even at this stage, look at them and say, yeah, we don't think so. In other words, what ends up in the final report is really what the board and the council feels is appropriate. What the report will do is show you which ones could be determined to be in need of, not necessarily that you must find them in need of it. So that's where we are. And as I say, the study, I think, and you can get a chance when you look at it, we're going to find that not all 20 of the properties that we studied are really qualify for being in need of redevelopment. So it won't be a list of 20 properties that we'll be looking at in the end.
And I can assist shepherding that through with the notice and
Yeah.
notifications that are necessary for the planning board's official hearing as to it. At the end of the planning board's hearing, the planning board, it doesn't have to be the same night, but at the conclusion of it, will produce a resolution determining what properties are in need of redevelopment, which then goes back to the council for the redevelopment plan. Question, is it a redevelopment area study with condemnation? Or
Without condemnation.
It's much easier.
Any further questions? So we need to authorize George, or he's already been?
I think he's been authorized.
Yeah, I would, yeah, you authorized that back, truthfully, I hate to admit it, but in January. So yes, we've been working on it.
Okay. That's it. So I'll ask for any
You know,
further.
I can do a quick executive session if you want to, just as the pending litigation.
Hey, I'd love it.
Okay.
I'd love it, yeah.
Yes, please. Okay.
What, you?
I'm going to ask for public comment right now on anything that occurred, anything's going to bring you up. And if there is no comment, I'm going to ask you to leave. And we'll be going into executive session, and we'll be doing no business when we come back out of executive session. Thank you very much. On your way out, would you please just close the door, please? Thank you very much. So I need a motion to go out of public session and into executive session.
So be it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any negative?
Yeah, I just got close to this thing. This
I'll
battery
speak
died.
loud.
Going out of executive session,
make
go
that
back into
motion.
the regular session.
I'm going to regular session.
Here, a second. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, very good. Thank you very much. We're back in the public session. We will now go out of public session and adjourn the meeting. Do I have a motion to
I'll make
adjourn?
that motion.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay.
Good seeing you
Very
all.
good.
Glad to see
Thank
you.
you.
Oh.